co-founder of DLA Ignite. I've got Howard with me today, and we're going to be talking about his book, Leading the Listening Organization, Creating Organizations That Flourish. Really enjoyed it, Howard. I've not read a book like it, and there's a lot that we can learn from this. Before we dig in, where can people find you?
Hi, Tim, and hi, everyone. Thank you for that. So first of all, people can find me on LinkedIn, Howard Krais, that's Krais, or my company is called True Communications, T as in TRUE, truecommunications.com.
Howard, great book. What I think it's important actually to talk about the inspiration behind this, isn't it? Because you've got two co-authors.
Yeah,
and you were kind of at an event or something, and then you decided to write it. So tell us about the inspiration behind it.
Yeah, it's actually about 6 years now in the making, Tim. We were at an event in Copenhagen, communications profession event, and the last session on the second day, quite a long session, was called Open Space. Some people may know Open Space. Unconference, I think, is another modern term for that type of session where you don't have an agenda. I put my hand up and I said, I want to talk about listening. It's one of those things where people sort of decide what conversation they want to join. And what did I mean by listening in those days? 6 years ago, pre-pandemic, I was worried as a communicator, internal communicator in a big company. I was working at GSK at the time, I think, that the communicators were suffering in that budgets were being tightened, travel budgets taken away, teams being made smaller. And I was worried that, how does a communicator listen to their audience if they're not able to actually go out and meet people and see things? And we weren't so used to using Teams in the way we are today, perhaps.
Right.
And if you're not listening, I worried that as a communicator, if you claim, as I hope communicators do, to be the voice or to be able to speak for the voice of the organization, how can you do that if you're not talking to people, not getting out the head office? And B, how do you know whether the materials that you're producing are actually having any effect? So that's where I started. And then, as I said, the event was in Copenhagen, and two of the colleagues, my two other colleagues, when we came back to London, we said, well, let's get together. Let's see if there's some work to do. And we did a small scale. We decided to go on and do a bit of work, and we ended up doing a small scale survey, which produced the first report. And actually, we did 4 reports over the next sort of 3 years or so. Small scale survey, a big survey, some stuff on best practice in listening, and then some focus groups, particularly on the topic of leadership, which was the sort of big thing that came out of our big survey. And at the end of each report, we probably said, are we done now? Well, that was all fun. Thanks very much. See you later. And then someone would say, oh, well, maybe there's a bit more work here and a bit more work here. And after the 4th report, I think we felt we'd done all the reports we were going to do. And one of us said, well, maybe there's a book. And that's what happened. And so the Routledge were very, very generous and have supported us in terms of publishing the book. And it probably took us, a year, 15 months or so to write it. And it was published just before the holidays, the end of December, and launched properly just about a month ago.
And so I think the key thing about those reports and is that it's actually based on data. It's not like what Mike, Kevin, and Howard is. It's not necessarily your opinion.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And actually, it's worth mentioning the 3 of us as well. Mike is, Kevin, first of all, Kevin's he's what I'd call an academic. I mean, he runs a training business, but he's an academic.
So that's Kevin Ruck, isn't it?
Kevin Ruck, yeah. Some people, he runs a business called the PR Academy. Mike is a sort of a career consultant. He runs his own business called Curavel.
So that's Mike
Pounsford.
Pounsford, yeah.
And I was the in-house guy. Last few years at Johnson Matthey, before that GSK, Ernst & Young, and similar places. So we came at these things, from different sides of the same coin, if that makes sense. And I think that helped us in terms of not making it too academic or too non-academic. And Kevin really held our feet, very close to the floor in terms of making sure that this was a very well, getting a lot of sources and a very well resourced book in terms of what we. So I think it stacks up from an academic perspective, but it's written in a very accessible manner, I think, for anybody.
Yeah, I would say that even though it's got data and in a way you're saying that there's an academic leading, it's not like it's a textbook. It's actually very, very easy to go through and talk about. So when we're talking about the listening organization, what do you mean by that?
Look, our premise, I suppose, is that listening in an organization is critical to better performance.
And this is listening by leadership.
Yes, and we think this is sort of the first book of its type. This is about listening internally, listening to your employees, not listening to customers. Obviously, that's a very good thing too, and listening to other stakeholders, but listening to your employees. And we think that if you do that well, you improve performance. And you do that for many reasons. People, we all know we take listening for granted. We learn to listen from when we were very small children. And I think part of our challenge is that people almost think, oh, we must do it well because we just do it naturally. But organizations are not very good at listening. Whether that's a survey that just happens because it's always happened and nothing is seen to happen with the.
I've worked for companies where we've had an employee survey every year. And of course they tell you it's confidential, but you never know whether that's the case or not. So you always up the figures. I always used to take whatever my opinion on was and upped it.
I mean, that's interesting in itself, isn't it? Because I've never doubted the confidentiality aspects. And actually, if you're working with big research companies, then, and not everyone does, I appreciate, but if you do work with, then they're sort of bound to the confidentiality bit. What worries me personally more is that nothing happens as a result of the survey.
Yes.
And so I've got a favorite phrase at the moment is that people talk a lot around survey fatigue. And I think what they mean is, well, we can't do another one because we do too many surveys. And I think survey fatigue actually means we do too many surveys that nothing happens with. And if something was seen to happen as a result of doing surveys, something tangible, then people will be quite happy to do further ones. So that's a great example of not listening or listening positively. And, listening can come in many shapes and sizes, obviously. We believe that, if you listen to the people closest to the customer, you would have more, really good sort of customer intelligence around, what people are thinking and how they're reacting, perhaps to your latest product, perhaps to a pay, to a price rise or whatever it is that gets people phoning and speaking to the organization. If you're looking to improve a process, we'll speak to the people who are closest to that process about how you can improve it. And there's a lot of those sort of processes in place, but that's something that you can do. There's a huge growth in areas like, and rightly so, of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example. If you believe that at the heart of DE&I is to bring more diverse voices to help you make better business decisions, well, you can't do that unless you're properly prepared to listen to more diverse voices and seek out those voices and actually make them part of your decision-making process. So I think all of those things, play and many others, we call it the listening age. We think that now is the time more and more people, want to have a voice. Younger people coming into the organizations expect to have a voice. And since the book's been launched, Tim, what's really interesting is a sense of there's something, and I've got to be careful here, but there's a sense in, there's a societal thing, I think, about people feeling that they're losing their voice. Our public discourse, our politics is sort of to the margins. And I think there's a desire for people to find their voice. And there's other surveys, Edelman's work on trust is a very good example, where they say trust is still, number one area for trust is within organizations. So I think people look to their organization and say, I want to have a voice, and I've got ideas, I've got questions, I've got concerns, I've got challenges, but I want to be able to voice those. And I'd like to have an answer and feel somebody's there to listen to me.
I think we're moving away, aren't we, from that, the leadership style. Well, I think we've probably moved away where leaders were expected to know everything. I know in my organization, I say to my people, I don't have all of the ideas. And if you know something better or you think you can do it better, then let us know. And I think that's really what we're trying to do, isn't it? It's about giving the employee a voice and the leaders then to actually listen and go, oh yeah, I never thought about that.
Yeah, definitely. We would say that, we have a model of a listening leader in the book. And I think, leaders what I would say is that leaders need to be, to recognize they don't know all the answers. They don't have to know all the answers. Being curious, being able to ask people who are closest to wherever that decision needs to be made. Being open to the fact that different voices can help them make better decisions. And I think this is really at the heart of it, Tim, is it's not about abrogating leadership responsibility. We're not saying actually we want some sort of free-for-all on decision making that everybody has a say. It's not that at all. It's a leader still a leader and still makes the decisions, but they can make better decisions if they're listening to different voices, diverse voices, to the people who can help them, the experts who can help them make that better decision. And there is an old-fashioned, definitely, we've all experienced it, I'm sure, the hero leader. We call it the parent trap in the book, around leaders who sort of feel they need to know everything. They need to have an answer for everything. And actually, some of our earlier work, there's a lot around psychological safety, I think, at the moment. And in this context, psychological safety is obvious, in terms of staff and employees speaking up and whether they feel safe, whether they feel able, to ask the difficult question, to ask what might be the stupid question. Just people are nervous about doing it, as you said about your survey. Concern that someone somewhere is listening, particularly in environments where, there's a lot of cost reductions and perhaps redundancies. People are very understandably, sort of not quick to come forward always with their opinions. But actually, the psychological safety works at the leader level too. Is the bit I wanted to just get in. Was it leaders also, we found in our research, can be nervous about what happens if I don't know the answer. What happens if I'm asked to say something by the organization, but I sort of agree with other people? I heard a story the other day where someone said, well, a leader had said to them recently, I don't want to ask that question because I don't want to open a can of worms.
Yep.
And my feeling was, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to open a can of worms and know what's something? What can you lose? So I think that there's a lot of reasons why leaders don't listen necessarily. There's one other thing I think that's important here as well, is that a lady called Elizabeth Williams, who's a Canadian academic, did a bit of work for us. This is really fascinating. And she looked at 18 of the sort of most well-known MBA schools in the world, in places we'd all be familiar with, and looked at their courses and did a bit of a word search on the word listening, saw how many modules or whatever included listening. Out of 18 schools, which is more than 18 MBAs, one course talked about listening, and that was listening to customers. And the point here is aspiring leaders are not being taught this. They're being taught where they're taught around communications, which is not all of them, but where they're taught about how to communicate. It's about broadcast, it's about one to many, me to you, but it's not about being curious, about listening. So those skills are either in sort of natural, and I've worked with some brilliant leaders who naturally get the idea that I need to bring my people with me, but they're not taken for granted that this is what leaders are going to be, have got those capabilities.
And I think that idea of psychological safety is so important, isn't it? Because, if you think, when I was in corporate, if people did find out that you weren't unhappy, people didn't, you weren't part of the corporate. You had to follow the corporate line. And that isn't necessarily right for the company, because sometimes it's about speaking out, saying, well, actually, I think this is wrong because this market is different, or this vertical is different, or something like that.
Yeah. And you can certainly see, I mean, I know it's more extreme, but you can certainly see, there's an article I was reading actually just today, I think from the FT, on whistleblowers and the way that many companies have treated whistleblowers. Now, that's obviously a particular form of listening. But before whistleblowers normally comes people who are just flagging up something's not working before you get to that sort of official whistleblower sort of phase. And very often organizations have deaf ears to those types of things. Post office at the moment would be a perfect example, I guess.
Yes, very much so, yes. So who is the book targeted at, Howard?
Yeah, so I think, two sort of groups, really. Anyone who deals with people on a day-to-day basis, so HR professionals, communicators, talent, those sorts of functions, people who are dealing with people, looking to engage people, but primarily leaders. It's a leader book. It's aimed at leaders. And at the moment, what we're finding first few months since we published is, because we come from a communications heritage background, getting onto communication platforms is pretty easy. Actually, it's sort of what I call the low-hanging fruit, which is all great, and we're talking to a lot of communicators. Getting into the sort of wider HR world is more difficult for us because it's not where we come from, but I think we'll be able to do that in the coming months. But the success of this book will be, how can we get in front of leaders? How can we really get to a wider business leader population? Because I think listening ultimately it's not, yes, we want comms people and HR people to be thinking about this, but we need leaders to be thinking, I can make better decisions, I can lead in a better way if I listen better.
So have you got any listening strategies at all that you could recommend to people?
Listening strategies. I think it's so. I mean, we talk in the book. We have, we do talk about listening strategies for an organization. I think for the individual, it's like most things. Recognize that this is something that you should be doing. There is in the book. There is a sort of what I'd call a fairly starter for 10 listening audit that organizations can do. Actually working on something a bit better than that at the moment in terms of a service we might offer. But I think that look at how you listen, and very often I suspect leaders may well think we listen pretty well. We do this, we do that, whatever. Employees may have a very different view. So, I think be open to thinking, how do we get our employees to trust us? What are the things that we can do to demonstrate that we're serious about listening? And not to boil the ocean. Don't think we're going to change it all in one day. Start to do some steps with certain bits of the population. There's lots. I mean, we list 21 methods of listening in the book. That could be online, it can be face to face, it can be obviously focus group type stuff, surveys, big and small. There's all sorts of different things you can do, but do it and do it well, and demonstrate that you're actually using that listening to improve the business.
Because I just as much as you use focus groups externally to get research for the book, you could be using focus groups internally, couldn't you, in terms of hearing the employee voice? Yeah,
focus groups, interesting, which I'm a big fan of. We found are actually not used as much as we would have expected. So yeah, for sure. Focus groups would be a great way to understand what people are really thinking.
And so ultimately, I know you're trying to create a movement around people-centric change, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I mean, when we set up True, so myself and my business partner Anne-Marie, we believe in people-centered change. So what that means for us is, in essence, doing change with people and not to people. And there's all the sort of stats. There's the McKinsey's sort of fairly famous stat that 70% of change programs don't deliver what they promise. And one of the main reasons for that being because you don't bring your people with you. Yeah. So that's at the heart of my beliefs, and listening is a big part of that. I think that, again, in the book, there's a whole chapter on listening as a sort of a big part of change management. And so I think, given all organizations pretty much are going through different amounts of change almost all the time, if you're not listening through that, if you're not helping your employees to really come with you on that journey, you're not going to deliver what you think.
So are we entering the age of listening then, Howard?
Well, we believe so. I certainly hope so. And I've said before around I think people are hungry for it, and it's something. But there's all sorts of other factors. I think in the pandemic, actually organizations did lean in a way they never had done before. They were very concerned about mental well-being, about how people were sort of adapting. I think we've lost some of that, but I'd like to think it was, in a sense, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So that's still a net gain. You see the start of the growth of functions like employee experience now, which has a heavy dose of listening at different points in the life cycle of an employee. I think it's sort of I hate the phrase the war for talent, but in that sort of competitive marketplace to get good people expect more. They have views and they want to share those views. So if you're not going to listen to those views, the growth of D&I and the sort of a great more sustainable businesses, I think again listening plays a role in those too. So I think there's a whole series of reasons. As I said before, younger people, Gen Z, people coming into the business, they just expect to have a voice now, and they won't hang around too long if they feel they haven't.
Or a listening organisation will retain the staff because it's a competitive advantage.
Yes, yeah, and there's lots of great examples in the book of case studies, example stories of where listening works and has worked really well. You know, so we shouldn't think that it doesn't. There's plenty of great examples of good listening.
So there's the book. Where can I get a copy? Apart from in my hand.
Well, isn't the phrase all good booksellers? Certainly online, it's easy. So the publishers are Routledge.
Yeah.
So if you go to Routledge and put in leading the listening organization, there is a code I can give, which is LTLO, leading the listening organization, LTLO 20. If you put that in the Routledge website, then you can get a 20% discount on the book. Right. But it's available on Amazon and Waterstones online, and you know, I think all booksellers have it online. I haven't seen it in the shop yet, but hopefully we will soon enough.
I'm sure it will appear soon. So Howard, thank you so much for today. Where can people find you?
So yeah, so they can find me on LinkedIn. I love to meet more people, and you know, the exciting thing, Tim, is that you mentioned listening movement. I was talking to somebody a colleague in Canada, in Newfoundland the other day, and she said, we need a listening army. Yes. So you'll see my LinkedIn posts are all got that hashtag listening army now, and we're really keen to have people join us. And I think there is a chance to build some form of movement. I don't know what that looks like just yet. It's early days, but I'm fired up, and I'd love people to join us. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Howard Krais, Krais, or through truecommunications.com.
Or hashtag listening army on
hashtag listening army. Absolutely.
On, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Howard, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book.
Thanks for having me, Tim.